Hello and welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Ellie Frith. Ellie is a teacher and the founder and the host of the Chewy Head podcast, a mental health psychology podcast based on her own mental breakdown story of suicide and depression. Ellie, good morning.
Hello, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, how are you?
Good, very well, thank you. We were just chatting earlier. The goal of today is to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into the tools and techniques that have helped you along the way that may be accessible to other people. And by discussing your journey, what we're hoping to do is normalize these kind of conversations and encourage people to have these type of conversations and open up, because in my opinion, more talking, more openness, less judgment is better.
Yeah, definitely. I think even having a conversation where you start by asking someone, how are you? You know, we do it so, it's just so rote, isn't it, to go, I'm fine, how are you?
Yeah.
And actually, you know, that rarely covers it, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. And I think I was doing an episode a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, you know, there's that two how are you? Says,
yes.
How are you? And then judging on the response, it's actually, how are you? And often it's the second one where people actually appreciate.
Yeah, that's what they say, isn't it? Yeah. I also think you need to have like an established relationship, don't you, in order to sometimes be able to feel confident and comfortable to actually say how you're really feeling.
Absolutely. And I think if there's something that always comes out, it's trying to establish who your kind of confidants are in terms of that kind of mental health. And sometimes they're not your close friends or your best friends or your family. They are, I don't know, sometimes they're just people who get you and are on that same wavelength.
Definitely, yeah. I know when I first had my breakdown, my mother-in-law would ask me every day how I was, and I used to it got to the point where I was like to my husband, can you just stop? Can you ask her to just stop asking me? Because it's like the worst question you could ask.
Yeah.
At the moment, because obviously the answer was, well, I've never felt like it's the worst ever.
Not particularly good, thank you. Yeah, and exactly. But I think that's a good response. No change since yesterday. It's still pretty bad.
Yeah.
Exactly. But speaking about your mental health journey, your breakdown, I would love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So in 2019, which seems years and years ago, which obviously it was, but it doesn't also at the same time, I was working in a school. I had quite a lot of responsibility for various different areas. If you're a teacher, you'll know that you can have all these different things that you're in charge of. Yeah. So I was doing quite a lot, and I was working very, very hard. I got up very early in the morning, would come to school for about 6:30, 6:15, and work 12, 13-hour days every day.
Teaching is hard, really hard.
Teaching is hard. It is a very hard job, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions about teaching as a job, because lots of people think, oh, you clock off at 3:30, you've got your holidays, what's the problem? But in reality, I don't, that certainly hasn't been my experience. So so anyway, so I was working really hard. I was on this kind of mission, I suppose. And I suppose the thing that I was trying to, I don't even really know where the mission was going, but it was going somewhere. And I knew that it would all be worth it when I got the results, or my students got the results that we'd worked so hard together for my year 11 cohort. And results day came, and the results that the students achieved were, in my opinion, not good enough. And not what I was expecting, and I just couldn't cope with it, because for me, the numbers, I've always had this strange thing around numbers being like, well, this is factual evidence that you are incompetent. You can't argue with numbers. And so I didn't take any, I mean, there were students in there who got 9s, but I didn't take any accountability for those, because I thought, well, that's just the student being amazing. But for the students who didn't achieve what they should have achieved, that was completely my fault, and I just couldn't move past that. And I kind of, it was like my brain broke at that moment, and I just couldn't understand the world. I couldn't reconcile myself to the idea that they could get these results and everything else would just carry on, and it didn't make any sense. I completely lost my footing. I didn't know who I was, what I was doing, and at that point, everything went downhill pretty quickly, I would say.
And it's interesting how you describe that kind of mission. That it's how you defined yourself at that moment was in the kind of expectation of your responsibility, those kids' results. And like you said, like, as perhaps it's something as you've grown up, this kind of idea of numbers, or that's factual evidence. And when those measurements came in and that didn't quite meet those expectations, like you said, because you were driven by that purpose and that mission underneath it all, that, I suppose when that doesn't happen, when those expectations aren't met, then suddenly you're very quickly starting to kind of question your very being.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite a common thing that people kind of look for their self-worth externally, and they look for something to be like, this is why I'm here, this is why I matter, this is who I am. And actually that's quite, as it turned out, that wasn't a great place for me to find my self-worth in, because I don't know what would have been good enough. I don't know, because as I say, I don't really understand the mission myself. So what results would have been acceptable, I'm not sure, but certainly those ones weren't. And I just couldn't, I didn't know who I was at that time. And from there it became really quite bad pretty quickly, because I think it was a case of, well, I can't meet my own expectations. I've proven that. The world has seen that through these numbers, and therefore
there's judgment in some respect.
Yeah, but also, I can't go on. How can I go on? There's nothing for me now. I couldn't see a future for myself at all from that moment onwards. So it's quite dangerous.
Hugely dangerous and scary for you. And do you? Because I was just thinking, as you talk through, you're very eloquent when you're talking about your mental health, and my assumption is that has come as a result of the journey that you've been through. Were you as kind of self-aware and articulate about your mental health prior to that incident?
No, because I imagine that I didn't just wake up one morning, look at some results and have a breakdown, and that was, from that moment on you have depression, you have anxiety, whatever. I very much doubt that was the case. I wasn't aware at all that I was depressed, but I imagine I had been depressed for probably quite a while.
Right.
Probably quite, you don't do anything other than work. You aren't really sleeping very well as a result of constantly thinking about work. You're allowing it to, prevent you from resting properly. I mean, all of those things are not great for your mental health.
No, absolutely. Like, and those kind of contributing factors, it seemed like you got to that point of that kind of, like you said, your mind broke, but I kind of getting the sense that actually a lot of the kind of ingredients might have been there previously.
I think they definitely were. I think looking back at the way in which I thought and some of the ways in which I was very much, as I say, I externalized my self-worth, and therefore I would do anything for anyone to please them, because the way I wasn't good enough, and who I was needed to be better. And the way that I could prove that I was better was by, I don't know, meeting other people's expectations constantly. And so I think having low self-worth is probably at the root of a lot of, well, I don't know, but from my own experience and from talking to people that I've met, it does seem to be quite a common theme, having low self-worth and then being vulnerable perhaps to having a mental health condition.
And I think, like you said, combining those things with low self-worth and then seeking that worth from external things can be a recipe for, frankly, disaster.
Yeah.
and from your perspective, from that moment, if you don't mind me asking, like what went on? What was it like? It sounds extremely scary, and I can only just say I'm so sorry that you had to go through it.
Oh, don't be sorry. I'm not sorry I went through it, actually. I think it was a good thing. It didn't feel like a good thing at the time. But it was basically like the part of me that was like, that obviously was how I got through every day, was still there. So the part of me that was like, get up, go to work, do this, do all of these things that you need to do to prove that you're good enough. You still need to do those things. But my body basically reacted against that and wouldn't. So I was having panic attacks. I never had a panic attack before in my life, and I was having them like a lot.
As in what, multiple times a day?
Oh yeah, like 8, 9, 10 times a day, more than that maybe. Lots of crying, not being able to physically do things, put on my shoe. I remember I was like, right, come on, get up, put a washing on. I had a panic attack. My head was in the washing machine. It was ridiculous. But I just kept trying to I think in the initial stages, I was just trying to force myself to carry on, and my body was just saying, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to work. And I remember I was supposed to be leading on one of the inset days, staff training day. I think it was like a day after I'd had my breakdown, and my husband was like, Ellie, you can't go in. And I was like, well, I am going to go in. Of course I'm going to go in. And I got myself dressed. It took me a long time. I couldn't put my shoes on. I just couldn't. And at that point, I just felt really, that was even worse. It was like a second, because I realized I can't force myself through this in the way that I normally do. I can't force myself, because, you know, getting up every morning at, you know, whatever, 5:30, you know, it's tiring, it's exhausting, but you're like, no, we're doing this for the mission. But suddenly the mission wasn't enough to motivate me, or I don't know whether it was, the motivation was there, but it was kind of, I didn't know what was the mission anymore. I wasn't sure. I was just lost. So,
and it sounds like, you know, everything you're saying, you know, is almost like you were doing it all yourself. You were trying to keep on going on your own, and that must be really difficult. And did you get to a point where you were like, okay, and maybe this is incorrect, but I'm doing this on my own. I can't do this anymore. I need help.
Yeah, I think I got to a point where I had to acknowledge that my body was not going to let me. It didn't matter what my mind was trying to make me do. My body wasn't going to allow me to do it. And
so the body pumps on the brakes.
Yes, literally. I just couldn't. Wow. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, just lots of panic attacks. My thoughts were all over the shop, so I couldn't even really coherently, as I say, maybe not necessarily express how I was feeling. I would just say the same thing over and over again, like I can't do it, you know, I'm a failure, just lots and lots of that over and over again, and not really being able to make sense of things, just really disorientating, I would say. And so I suppose I did become more reliant at that point on my husband. But in my head, it was always going to be, oh, this is just for now, and I'll probably feel better tomorrow, or I just need to pull myself together, and it will all. So I remember very early on, I think, because I didn't go back to work, I just couldn't cope with it, and then I went to the GP. My husband took to the GP, and then I got involved with a supportive listing through Mind, and I can't remember when I started seeing a therapist, but it was before I went to hospital. It all kind of blurs into one, but I remember being in this supportive listening discussion with this lovely lady at Mind, and I was like, I don't understand, it's been 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks and I'm still like this. Like, when will this change? And she was like, you know, that's relatively quick, really, to expect any change. So I think it was just kind of surrendering to myself and just acknowledging, do you know what, I'm not in control. My mind isn't going to be enough to be the driving force anymore, and I'm going to have to be reliant on other people. I'm going to have to listen when my husband says, Ellie, you can't go to work because you can't put your shoes on. I'm going to have to acknowledge that, and that was really hard to do.
And you know, that kind of you know, release, how did it feel when you released and surrendered? I think that's a really good word for it. Like, did it feel good in a way, that, or is it it's kind of not good, I still feel terrible, but I'm now ready to accept that I can't go on like this?
I suppose in a way it was, I'm ready to accept I can't go on like this. And I think my immediate response, if I had to diagnose it, I'd say it was a lot of anxiety. And I think the longer that when I began to accept, actually, this isn't changing, this is staying the same. I feel just as bad as I did when I found out my results. I feel just as panicked, just as scared. And then it became, I think, probably depression, and very quickly I became suicidal, because it was, this isn't going to change. This is never going to change. I'm now a burden on other people. I'm reliant on other people, and therefore, you know, I need to take control. I think it was really all about control. Because then it was, I need to take control of this situation by, you know, killing myself, essentially. And
in your mind at that time, that was a very clear and simple kind of logic and calculation.
Yeah, I think essentially, because I think people struggle with the idea of suicide as it being something that's selfish and something that's, you know, you're not thinking of anyone but yourself. But for me, and I can understand why people might think that, because in a way you are only thinking of yourself, but you're actually, my way of describing it is, my self-worth was so low that the idea of me being dead, although to other people that sounded awful and, you know, the worst thing ever, for me it was like, well, you don't matter that much anyway, so when you're dead they might be upset for a day or two, but because you're so worthless it won't matter long term. And when you have that as a belief, like, you know, that to be true, it's not a problem, the idea of being dead.
And that perception, like you said, but you can see that, because I completely agree with you, and we've talked on the podcast, you know, about suicide, about attempts on suicide, and my experiences as a Samaritans volunteer, like talking to people, like, there is a real disconnect between the subjective reality and the objective of what other people are thinking. But like you said, that's, I think how you put it is perfectly articulated. When you've got that, your self-worth is is rock bottom, is zero, then actually looking at other people, given that you're saying actually my worth is dependent on other people, when they judge that, you say, well, actually, they're not going to miss me. Their lives will be better as a consequence, which of course that's not the case. But in your reality, like you said, it's underpinned by that very strong belief, and that belief can therefore lead to those actions.
Yeah, and I think when you feel like your life is just totally out of control, and having been someone who was very much like, this is my 5-year plan, this is my 10-year plan, you know, to go from that level of kind of I'm self-motivating and determining my future to I'm completely out of control and I have no say in whether I can get up and go out the house, you know, the only thing that you really are left with, I suppose, is your ability to decide whether you want to live or not, and that's the ultimate form of control, I suppose, that you can take at that moment.
And it's not only the ultimate, it's the most fundamental. It's that choice, isn't it? Do I want to live or not?
Yeah. And I think the other thing to obviously think about is at the time you're filled with this, it's like the worst, it's like that feeling where you're swinging on your chair, which we've all done, and you have that moment when the chair actually tilts a bit further back than you were expecting it to, and you think, oh my goodness, am I going to hit the floor? And it's like having that feeling all the time, and living with that feeling all the time is very close to being unbearable. And
because it's a very highly kind of heightened state, isn't it? Of very ultra aware.
It's exhausting. Your mind is just, and actually it's kind of calming in a way. It's almost like a form of self-soothing to think, you know, actually you don't have to feel like this, you can just be dead, you know. That's quite soothing. And when your thoughts are racing all over the shop and you think, oh, but I can hold on to this one thing, that's quite nice and reassuring in a way, or it was at the time, obviously.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So actually, relatively speaking, compared to all the other feelings, thoughts, emotions that were going on, actually that the thought of that brought some calm and some reassurance and comfort, which I can only think could reinforce those thoughts.
Yeah, and because the other thing is, nothing else made any sense. It didn't make sense to me. I've done X amount of work, the children have done X amount of work, but yet we've got these results. I want to go to work, my body's not allowing me to go to work, therefore I can't. So none of it's making any sense to me. And what the one thing which seems to make sense logically, you know, kill yourself and you'll be dead, you know, that you can hold on to that because that works. The rest of it doesn't work at all.
And thankfully we are having this conversation today, which is amazing. And I'd love to understand, how did you get to here? So was there a choice where you're saying, actually, I'm not going to go through with this, I'm determined to get better, or was there another journey involved?
Well, I then went on to attempt suicide, and then I ended up in hospital. I was transferred to a second hospital about halfway through I spent 3 months in total in hospital, and I was transferred to a different one about exactly halfway through. And I think moving to a different hospital was for me the moment when I said, maybe there is something else. I don't know what it is. And I think being okay with that and saying, I don't know. You know, you haven't known this whole time when this chaos has been going on, and you still don't know what could happen. And previously your response to that has been, well, I'll just kill myself then because I don't want to not know. Whereas I was kind of saying, okay, well, we don't know what's going to happen. We aren't in control, but let's just see what happens. And I suppose having that small amount of curiosity and just allowing myself to have the space to just not know, that made all the difference, I think, in terms of me recovering and moving away from the idea of suicide. But I wouldn't say that it's, you know, one day you feel suicidal and then you're like, oh, that was a silly idea, let's put that behind me. I think actually, you know, I'll even now there are days when that is almost like a thought pattern that I've now bedded in, where it's a place that I can go to. And I think people are afraid sometimes to talk about that. And certainly when I was experiencing that and I'd left hospital, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I can't tell anyone because they'll put me back in hospital, or my husband will start really worrying about me. People will be with me all the time again. And actually, it's okay. It's obviously it's not ideal, but it's okay. And I think we're very afraid of suicide, the action, but actually the thoughts and all of those things surrounding it, they don't necessarily mean you're going to kill yourself. Like, you can have suicidal thoughts and that can be just how you're feeling at that moment, and that doesn't mean that you have to act on those thoughts, and it doesn't mean that, you know, anything bigger needs to really happen. You just need to wait those thoughts out, I suppose.
And again, I think you put it incredibly articulately. Like, and I think that this is an area where I can personally relate to. Like you know, in a similar experience. Those having, I personally have suicidal thoughts since I was 14, and they're still here every day.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to explain to people that, like you said, your mind can just go there. Now, I could be sitting there and someone could hit me left field from, something from work, and it could panic me. And I'll think, okay, go to that tree now. That's where the mind goes.
Yeah.
But you can then, after years of work, can go, hold on, the tree's not going to solve anything. Like, there's another 20 steps before that I could perhaps try to maybe pull myself back and actually solve things. And actually, to be honest, I normally get to step 2 and I've solved the issue.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, like you said, the expansion of the mind. It can go there, and actually it can't retreat. It's almost irreversible, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think actually saying to yourself, okay, yeah, there is a tree there. Yes, I acknowledge that there's a tree there. And that's an option. That's one option, and actually facing that, rather than, I think some people are like, oh my goodness, I can't possibly think of that. Don't allow yourself to think of that. And, if you don't think about something, it makes you think. And I think that the more comfortable you become with it, the more you're like, I know when there are times when actually I need to tell someone about this. I need to talk about this. I need to say, do you know what, let's be together this afternoon, because I don't feel good right now. And when there are just times when, it's late at night, I don't know about you, but that's the worst the worst time of day for me.
Well, I mean, there's only your thoughts and darkness, which I sometimes isn't think a recipe. And I've got a young daughter who's 2, and she obviously at some stages keeps me up at night. So when I'm not sleeping as well, it can go quite it can get quite dark quite quickly. But I think how you put it is really fascinating, that when initially you considered that attempt, that was the only solution. There's one solution. But actually, when you went to the hospital the second time, suddenly you're kind of thinking, hold on, that's not the only solution. And actually, there are maybe some other solutions that might help me. So, and once you've got that kind of when it opens the door and a little bit of light shines in, you can really cling to that, because, and I'm not sure if it's something about, there's a very deep urge to live in life in general, I assume, because that's how we've evolved over millions of years. But there's something, in the darkest moments, you can feel it. You can feel it cling on. It can say, I don't want to go down that route. I really want to go down that route, but I know this is going to be really, really hard, but I really want to cling to it.
Yeah, when I was in hospital, in the first hospital, it's quite interesting, because I tried to kill myself a lot in that hospital, very unsuccessfully. And one of the times I don't want to disturb anyone, but I was making an attempt on my life, and another patient walked in on me and was like, oh, Ellie, this isn't what you want to do, and basically talked me down at that moment. Which was really interesting, because that patient was in there for similar reasons. So I just found it interesting that the idea of them killing themselves was fine, but the idea of me killing myself and then witnessing it, that wasn't fine, even though they totally understood that I would want to kill myself. And I think at that moment when they came in and they said, you're thinking this, you're feeling this, I know, and for them to say, I know exactly how you feel, and they really did. And I just thought that was really interesting, and kind of links to that idea of that spark and that hope that you're talking about, because, I suppose we're kind of innately told, you shouldn't seek death out, so I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think, and like you said, when that person walked in, how did they approach it? Was it almost in a very, very calm way? So, no, hold on, Ellie, no, you don't want to do this today. This isn't, this is how you're feeling. Or was it something that was kind of like panic? Because it seems like I can imagine like someone just walking in and kind of go, Ellie, no. Well, let's have a conversation. Let's talk it through. It's almost like for them, it's the most normal thing in the world to see, right?
Yeah, it was. It was a very surreal experience. And interestingly, I suppose when you are a patient, you have this sense of community with other patients on the ward, because you have this thing in common, which is that you found yourself in this role of becoming a patient and losing maybe some of your agency, some of your control, some of your identity. You kind of are all together in this really strange bubble, and so you do have this sense of community, and you do look out for the other patients on the ward, and to have someone come in at that moment, that was really, for me, it was really powerful, as just to think that somebody cared. I think that really that made a difference, even though obviously I knew that my family and whoever else cared, but I don't know, I think depending on I've talked to quite a few people who work on different psych wards and stuff, and I think sometimes it really depends on who you have on the ward at that time, and the culture on that particular ward. But particularly on that ward, there was definitely a sense of kind of maybe the staff being quite desensitized, because they're, for them it's their 9-to-5 job, and they're there every day, and they're dealing with very difficult and challenging patients, and seeing a lot of things which I imagine would make you feel quite desensitized. But obviously as a patient, that's maybe the first time that you've ever been on a psych ward. It's a huge moment in your life of transition and change, and so having someone who's also going through that kind of acknowledge your experience and say, yeah, I've been there, I am there right now, I'm in the same situation that you're in, that really struck me as being, a pivotal moment for me.
Yeah, and that's 100% empathy. That is 100% compassion. That is someone who can really, for the first time, almost maybe stop you in your steps and say, look, we are both going through this together. This is how I'm feeling, this is how you're feeling. Like that's incredibly powerful, incredibly human, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so from those experiences, very, very intense experiences, there was very thankfully kind of a road to recovery. It sounds like a lot of this happened in a very short space of time, and to talk to you now, it seems like in the grand scheme of things, everything's not recovered, but come to a place where you are able to work in a very short space of time. That's extremely intense progress.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I still feel there is I think being on a psychiatric ward is in itself quite challenging for your mental health. I think I personally went through a period when I was under section where I couldn't go outside. I didn't go outside for 3 weeks, and that's not great for your mental health. Your limits in terms of being able to see the people that you love, they're controlled, and there are lots of things which are actually detrimental to your mental health. There are lots of things that you witness, or that you experience, or you're part of, which actually can be quite traumatic. And so I find now, part of this next stage of my recovery, or whatever you want to call it, I have lots of kind of traumatic memories and flashbacks to things that happened on the ward. And so part of that is, and I'm also determined, it's one of the reasons I created my podcast, I'm determined to learn from this experience, and also to not forget this experience. I know that sometimes people, which is absolutely fine, and I totally respect that, that's how they want to approach having a breakdown. They have the breakdown, and then that's it, we don't talk about it, we move on. But for me, it's still like very much a part of my daily life. Like, I think about people who I was on the ward with, I think about things that happened a lot. And so, yeah, I would say in terms of my recovery, I don't know where I'm up to, really. I don't think it's a straight line, is it? Sadly?
No, not at all. But I mean, and it's all part of it's a process, isn't it? It's an ongoing process. And like you said, the ingredients were in your mind. You said up until the point where you actually had that a breakdown was manifested. But and those things, are part of you, or may have been part of you, and trying to unpick some of those things, or trying to cope with them, trying to live with them, and manage them in a way where you're able to have a fulfilling and positive and happy life is something that's I assume will take a long time. But like you said, it's amazing that you've come this far and able to get back to work in a relatively short space of time.
Yeah, I think for me,
especially the same job, which contributed.
Yes, well, you say that, but I've really thought very carefully about, number one, for me, a really big decision was, do I go back to the school that I was working at. And although obviously lots of people would just be like, obviously not, for me, it was really scary to say, actually, I'm not going to go back, even though I don't have, because then I was job hunting, obviously, in the pandemic, which isn't a great time to find a job. So I was in a position where I was like, I know the deadline was approaching for me to be able to hand my notice in. And I went on a walk with my husband and I was talking it through with him. And I was saying, look, if I hand my notice in, I don't have another job. What are we going to do for money? And he was like, look, you have to do what you think is the right thing to do for you and your mental health. And then I did hand my notice in. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I suppose because I'd learned that skill already of, okay, we don't know what's next. But that's okay, and we just need to kind of be okay with that, and know that, you know, things will work out. They will have to work out.
Well, that's the thing, they have to work out, and also I will make them work out.
Yeah, that's it. And for me, that was like a really big moment. I think it was quite empowering, just saying, okay, well, we'll just trust that it will work.
And I think that's a really good word, is that trust, isn't it? I'm going to trust, not only in life, but through my own action as well. I'm going to be able to trust whatever outcome happens.
Yeah, that's it. And so I didn't want to go back and just be in the same environment. So I've kind of purposefully looked for the same job. I suppose the other thing is when you have a breakdown or a breakthrough, as my therapist like to call it, you have this opportunity, which lots of people never have in their life, to kind of review your own situation and go, right, well, is this what I want from life? What do I want from life? Do I want to do this job? Is this what makes me what makes me happy? What things am I going to say no to in the future? Which things am I going to go and seek out? And so for me, I was like, actually, I really love education. I really believe in the idea of helping others to make progress in their own lives and just being there to support somebody else. I love that. Of course I want to do that, but that doesn't mean I need to do it exactly the same way that I did it before. And actually, if I do it the same way I did it before, you might end up in hospital again.
And I think a lot of the things what you're saying is that question, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? What do I want to do? But underpinning all of that is like you said, that mission. It's why you want to do something. Like, are you much clearer in why you want to do things now, in terms of maybe setting them in a way that you know will not contribute to anything kind of pretty, you know, bad in the future?
Yes, I think you have to find, you have to make a decision at some point. If you're suicidal, are you going to give it a go? Are you going to have that opportunity that we've talked about? Are you going to trust in the idea of life and the possibility that things might get better? And if you're going to make that choice, and you do have to make that choice, of course, I'm not suggesting it's as simple as well, boom, sorted. It's not like that at all, and we've already talked about that. But you do need to you may need to make some form of commitment, I suppose, to the idea of life. And when you've made that commitment, you have to kind of, I suppose, back it up with reasons why you've made that commitment. So I know in hospital and doctors call it things like protective factors, and, you know, like your family, your dog, and whatever. But I think actually it's about, you know, what is it that motivates you to want to stay alive? And you know, obviously Matt Haig wrote a book, didn't he? Reasons to Stay Alive. And they don't need to be big things, and they can even just be the idea of thinking, actually, I'm a human being and I have worth, and I'm not here to prove I think sometimes the way that society is kind of structured, we have this feeling of, right, okay, it's all a big race and we need to make our mark in the world and we need to prove ourselves and we need to achieve certain things and meet certain milestones. And actually you don't actually need to do anything. You really don't. Like, you being alive, that's it. That's fine. You can just be alive. You can just enjoy your life. And I think looking at life and thinking, okay, well, what do I want from life? Rather than, okay, what do I need to do to prove that I should be alive, or to prove that my life is worthwhile and matters? Yeah, well, who are you doing that for? Because you're not doing it for yourself. And so for me now, I'm really just trying to think, okay, well, what do I want to get out of life? Because I know that what the other option is, and I'm kind of okay with the other option, but I've made a commitment to being alive now. And so I'm going to live my life in a way which I suppose means that at the end of the day, I can say, well, I can kind of have that conversation with those dark thoughts and say, well, actually, no, you know, here are some reasons that I would like to be alive. I don't know if any of that made any sense.
No,
but...
I mean, hugely. I mean, in a hypothetical situation, because it's interesting you talk about kind of what, you know, the kind of the condition or those expectations that society puts on it, or we put on ourselves as a translation of what we think society wants. It's something we talk about a lot. Like, do you feel like and maybe it's Britain? I mean, I think perhaps we can you know, both you and I, as being in Britain, can only talk about that. Do you get the sense that, perhaps as a teacher, this would be an interesting kind of avenue? Do you think we have a responsibility as a society, as teachers, as mentors, to help people basically achieve what you've achieved now, to get a sense of that worth from things like that aren't big and grand and growing and you know, and huge amounts of money and big houses and cars, etc., etc., etc. It seems like some people need quite a lot of help to kind of, I suppose it's to find beauty and reason in those little simple things that we completely gloss over and take for granted in our day-to-day lives, when we are chasing these big ideas and these big dreams, which seem to be celebrated in the world, in the media, but the reality is that they don't bring those internal senses of joy, of self-worth, of confidence, of capability to actually live a fulfilling and happy life.
Yeah, I kind of labeled it as the when then mindset. When this happens, then I'll be happy.
Yes,
And that was my mindset, very much like, when I get this next promotion in teaching, then I will be able to be happy. But I mean, I had no skills in terms of understanding how to be happy, so that would never have worked. Yeah, and I think even the way in which we talk to children in terms of like, oh, we're always asking them things like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, oh, are you good at maths? And all of this. And you think, why are we asking them what they want to be? Why aren't we just okay with who they are? Why can't we just celebrate who they are right now and the things that they enjoy? Why does it always need to be about where you're going? We all know where we're going. We're going towards death fundamentally, aren't we? That's the end result. And so actually, we have this way of looking at life as like a machine that you're kind of progressing through, and that's quite sad, because then you're missing out on actually living. So yeah, I think we should focus far more on that. And I also think school in a way sells a lie, doesn't it? Education, it sells this lie that if you work hard and you get these grades, then you can go on and do whatever you want in life. And actually,
that's not the case.
It's not the case. And the skills that you really need are resilience, empathy, you know, all of those things. In a way, they're just as important, if not more important, than having an A star.
But I mean, for what you're saying makes so much sense. Like, and you're a teacher, like, right? Why isn't education changing? What is it?
Because I think the world is expanding. I think the population grows. Things are, you know, people. It's more and more competitive out there, isn't it? It is. It's more competitive, and I think that we are. I think through the rise of social media as well, we're very kind of visually judgmental of people. You know, you look at a picture of someone's Instagram and, right, okay, well, they've got the expected body type, they've got a car, they've got, you know, so it's very easy to make these quick judgments of people and then dismiss the people who don't meet those expectations. And I think that probably filters into, you know, all walks of life, sadly. I do think that schools are trying, I think, in their own way. But
maybe it's a really hard challenge.
Well, they're in the world. So yeah.
And with that, I suppose the question as a kind of relative new parent as well, I think it's fascinating how you said that. We're always asking about where people want to be, what they want to do when they grow up, and you can see, even if you don't mean it, you can get a sense that someone, a little child who doesn't necessarily understand or have yet the mental development to be able to, you know, to articulate how well you're putting it and to understand these things, to say, well, actually, there might be a little hint of, okay, well, why is someone asking me what I want to be? Why aren't I good enough? And you can see from a very early age that any thoughts that are created, or any patterns or beliefs that are created in that way, could be very damaging later on. Yeah,
absolutely. And then, you know, you know, you only have worth when you have a profession, or you're pursuing that profession, and look what happened to me as a result of that. You know, it wasn't great. I have a dog. I don't have children, but I actually it's a terrible decision really, but I got this puppy when I was really depressed, and then went into hospital, could be with this puppy. But anyway, coming out of hospital and having this dog and having the structure of the dog, you know, having to meet its needs, was massively helpful for my mental health. But I also think if you ever want to learn about joy, just watch a dog you know, because they don't think, should I do this, or is this meeting the expectations of other dogs? They don't run on the park and ask, am I running as fast as the dog next to me? They just run because they love running, and that's enough, and they know that they are enough the way that they are, and they just pursue joy, and that's so beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I love how you say that, because I'm just imagining like some little pit bull versus a whippet running along, and the pit bull looks at it and goes, "Do you know what? I'm so happy you're so fast. Good on you. Get there first. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Don't worry about me." And it's that mindset, exactly. It's not that kind of judging, but then, like you said, it's very hard. It's very hard, you know, when we are pushed towards, you know, in a channel of get a certain grade to do this, get to have a certain CV to do this, get a job to do this. It's very, you can see very quickly how people can, you know, kind of structure and organize and focus their lives based on this kind of, how did you call it? This if-when thinking.
When
then thinking, which is like the conveyor belt, isn't it? And I think, you know, acknowledging that, and I think sometimes, you know, lifting out, stepping back and seeing that you're on this conveyor belt and seeing that you've got this then when mindset can be really powerful, because then you can start to think, hold on, do I really want this? And is this a way that I want to think? I think what I personally found difficult, I know a few of my friends as well, is that stepping off that conveyor belt. Like, society doesn't necessarily give you how to have a kind of a balanced and happy and alternative way of living. It doesn't give you those options. Like, it gives you some pretty average options, you know, 3 or 4 in front of you. You look at the people who are in them, maybe who are 40 or 50, thinking, Jesus, is that's what my life is going to be like? Yeah. And that's quite powerful negatively as well. And I think there's another option is tough.
It is. And then also when you decide, right, do you know what, I'm not going to live like that anymore. I'm not going to try and compete in this nonsense competition which actually achieves nothing and makes no difference whatsoever. Why do I care if he can run faster than me, or if he gets a promotion and I don't? Why do I actually care? I don't know. But you know, if you choose to step off that conveyor belt, everybody else hasn't stepped off. And so then you have to face the ridicule and the questioning of,
and the loneliness.
Yeah. And you then become misunderstood, and you know, I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because as humans, we're looking for connection all the time with other people. We're looking for those relationships, and yet we're also really crap at kind of comparing and doing all of the things which we know are just toxic and unhelpful. And
it's interesting you say that, because when you do take the very brave step to go off that conveyor belt, often the comments you get from other people are underpinned by their own jealousy that they haven't been able to do that. That you're trying something different, and maybe it's not jealousy, but there's some level of, again, a comparison of saying, well, I'm going to make you feel bad because I bloody wish I could have done that and I didn't.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult because in your own head you will still, it's not like you make a decision and then the thoughts and the ways of thinking that have made you live that other way, that you know, the mainstream way of living, they don't just disappear. So when somebody external who's still on the conveyor belt then, you know, says those things to you, that confirms something in your own head which is underlying anyway. So but yeah, I kind of feel sorry for some people now, you know, that I would have previously looked up to. I kind of think
massive reframing, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think especially, I don't know, probably in lots of jobs, but definitely in teaching, it's this idea of, oh, well, I mean, I was here until 8 o'clock last night, or I didn't stop working until 10. And it's kind of like, oh, wow, that's amazing that you've worked. It's this like one-upmanship of how hard you've worked. It's just, but then really, that's sad, isn't it? Why have you worked till 10 o'clock at night? What's that done for your mental health? What's that done for your relationships with your family? What's that done for your physical well-being? Nothing.
And I think as you list all of those things, you have, you know, there's a desire, and what I would love people to more embrace is designing a kind of balanced life that works for themselves. So you can have a combination of, you know, acknowledging that in order to live a happy life, you do need work. Of course you need money. Of course you need, you know, if you want a career, that's fine. If you want a vocation, that's fine. But you also need healthy relationships. You also need family. You also need exercise, good food, whatever it is. And taking all that into account, if you take all that into account, you realize that working a job 60 hours or 70 or 80 hours a week can't, you know, something has to give. And if you're willing to do that and you're willing to sacrifice other things, then that's fine, because that in the knowledge of you doing that, then that's your decision, that's your choice. But to do it blindly and to think this is the way that I have to live, I mean, to me, it makes no sense, and it doesn't lead to one, good decision making, and secondly, a fulfilling life. And there's one thing we know, like you said, there's one outcome to life, and it's death.
Yeah.
And for people who are lucky enough to be on the planet for 80 odd years, I think it's something like 35,000 days. And let's be honest, the first 15,000 I can't bloody remember. The last 10,000 are pretty average anyway. There's not many days left.
Yeah.
That's what I think anyway.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're saying, and I think as well, because that was my life, completely out of balance, just one element really. And therefore, if something goes wrong in that element, it really rocks your whole world. Whereas actually, if you have a balanced life and you have a family and you've got friends and you've got interests and hobbies, I didn't have any interest in hobbies. I didn't have time for them. Any exercise I did was like functional, not because I enjoyed it, because it needed to be done. It was on my list. There's no enjoyment in that. And therefore, when something went wrong at work, that really affected me a lot more than it should have. And it really affected me because I didn't have the other elements.
Yeah. A good point. And like I say, when you judge your day, like you said, at the end of the day, when you're sitting in bed at night, everyone's asleep, and there's a natural reflection on how you are, then if you are disproportionately out of balance, of course you're going to feel negative. Of course you're going to feel low. Whereas if you've got other things in your life, you can say, well, do you know what? I had a pretty average day at work, but I did some great exercise. I had a lovely evening with my husband. My dog still bloody loves me. Like, I mean, you can see how that kind of 80% negativity can drop to kind of like a 50 or 40, and you can come to a reason at midnight going, actually, today was okay, and I'm going to go to sleep now.
I was on my podcast. I interviewed this I think she was an IBS specialist, but regardless, she was talking to me about how actually when you acknowledge that you need support and you need this balance that we're talking about, then actually that makes you, because we kind of think, oh, if you say that you need help, or if you say that you're not a machine and actually you can't just work 60 hours and be fine, that you need this three-dimensional life around you, we kind of see that as a weakness. Oh, you're clocking off at 5, that's a bit weak. Whereas actually it's a strength to have people around you, and to have like we've talked about, almost like a toolkit of different things that you need that nourish you and keep you going in the long term. Because I'm a living kind of evidence of actually working yourself to death just ends in, you're not going to be in the workplace long term. So you might as well have just if I'd clocked off a bit earlier and had a bit more of a life, we might not be in this situation now. So
and based on those experiences, like, I'd love to ask you about the kind of the tools and tips and techniques that have helped you along the way. And I assume there was some very intensive support within hospital. Are there things that you do now on a day-to-day basis that kind of keep you afloat, keep you happy, keep you enable to reflect on your day? What do you do day-to-day to take care of your mind?
Yeah, I would firstly say, in hospital, the first hospital I was in, as I say, it's a lottery, and in the first one I was in, the only treatment that was available to me was medication. There wasn't anything else, and so that was really hard. So if you are, I think as well, sometimes there's a misconception that people will give you help and you'll get, often the reason that you end up in hospital is because you're a danger to yourself or others, and it can just be a form of containment rather than treatment. So I think it's worth...
It's a prison, right? How you described it.
Yeah, certainly the first hospital was not conducive to me recovering, I would say, at all. The second one, they had loads of different things, occupational therapy, sensory room, all sorts of different things. But just, I think there is a misconception that, oh, you're in a psychiatric ward, you're getting help. You're not necessarily getting help. When I left hospital, I was actually discharged into the community, and I didn't have any support system in place. There was nothing put on for me because there was just huge waiting list, so I didn't have any support. So I kind of went from being in hospital and having to ask for them to make me a cup of tea because you have no control over anything, to suddenly being like, oh, you're at home on your own.
Which is scary again.
Oh, it was terrifying, honestly, absolutely terrifying. But I realized that I needed to do things. I needed I needed a structure to my day. So I did things like volunteer work. I wasn't ready for work, but I thought I'll do a bit of volunteering. I did a creative writing group. I forced myself to go out every day, and that made all the difference. And I know from my own experience that if you're feeling really depressed and really anxious and just the world is on top of you, you think that the last thing that you want to do or that you need to do is go out. And there were certainly days when, you know, the voices in my head, or whatever you want to call them, the thoughts were saying like, just be on your own, just don't do anything today, don't try anything. And actually acknowledging those thoughts and saying, well, yeah, but you need to be here, you need to be at that volunteer group on a Tuesday because they're expecting you to be there. And having that sense of purpose, that made a difference, because then when I did leave the house and when I did go and do those things, I could then at night reconcile with those thoughts and say, do you know what, I did that today, you can't take that away from me because I've done it. So yeah, having a purpose to leave the house was really important to me. Exercise made a huge difference. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, you know, sweat or just going for a walk, going outside, I think is really good for you. I always made sure I just did something positive that day, even if it was like, I don't know, cleaning the house, just something little.
Something you could cling to in the past that say, yeah, I did it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I do think connection, speaking to people. So because I had a dog, I met like a dog group at the park, and you know, I'm still friendly with them now, and it's just lovely to have just a conversation with someone. It makes a big difference to your day. And I know particularly now in you know, the COVID chaos of the world and lockdown, some people don't have those interactions, and I think actually that is one of our, I think if you look at yourself as a plant, plants have certain needs. They need water, they need light, they need nutrients, whatever. Humans do as well. I think one of our needs is social interaction, and that can be different for different people. For me, having that daily contact with people on the park, obviously I've got a husband, whatever, he was at work, but having someone else to talk to, that was great. Some people might need more, some people might need less, that's fine. But for me, I definitely think social interaction is really important. Sleep, I was on lots of medication to help me sleep, but I needed it at the time, and that made a big difference. Exercise, colouring, for me, I find colouring really, really helpful for my mental health. There were days in hospital where I would just colour all day, and that was fine. I'd say those are my things, really.
But what's amazing is that everything you've described is, you know, you are able to do pretty much within, if we stop the call now, you'd be able to go and do one of those things straight away. There's no waiting list, and all of them don't cost anything.
I did have therapy as well.
Yes.
Definitely did do that, and I did actually have therapy via the NHS, but I would say, so for me, that was before I went into hospital, and she basically told me that I was too unwell for therapy, so I couldn't see her. So I think it depends on how depressed you are in terms of whether they'll actually see you. So
which I suppose at the time that conversation, like, I suppose when you're when you're either paying for therapy or you're going to therapy with the NHS, like hearing that, you know, hopefully it follows up with a referral, but that's not often the most helpful thing to hear, is it?
No. I think, to be honest with you, what I learned throughout my journey is the moment that I kind of acknowledged, you know what, there isn't a medication or a person or a therapy individually that's going to be the cure. There isn't a cure. The cure, you know, you have to acknowledge that there is life, and you have to make a commitment to wanting to live life, and no medication is going to do that for you, no person, nothing. You have to do that yourself, and all of those things can be really helpful, but they're only helpful if you're willing to work with those things. You can't just sit there passively and expect things to happen for you. And I think for me, definitely that was a really big difference. And I think it's that willingness, isn't it, to give things a go.
That commitment, that motivation, and it's the momentum, isn't it? If you've got that motivation, you start doing these things, even if you're in the darkest and lowest of places. You can cling to those things, and it can little things. I got up today, I got dressed, I put my shoes on, whatever it is, you know, those things are successes, and those things can start building. And there's something that's really, I don't even know, I can't quite know how to articulate. Maybe you can, because you're a very articulate person. that kind of, you know, it's almost like a momentum of resilience, of positivity, of happiness, that you can kind of, it starts to feel like you're on firmer footing, a better grounding.
Yeah, so obviously being in hospital for 3 months wasn't great for my physical health. I didn't go outside for 3 months for 3 weeks during that time. And so when I left hospital, I was physically very unfit. But I was like, do you know what? I need to exercise. I'm going to start running. And I would say to myself, do you know what? You're just going to go outside and you're going to go for a little run. And if you need to stop, if it doesn't feel good, then
That's
stop.
okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah.
But you've still gone out for that run. And when you've left the house, you've won. And so gradually, I then built up, my fitness, I suppose. I'm not here to say I'm a marathon runner. That was never my goal. Wasn't to be a marathon. I've no interest in doing that. But I can run now for 40 minutes, whatever, without stopping, whatever. And the point of that is, it's that idea of resilience that you're talking about. It's me not putting any pressure on myself, but also saying, you are going to do it. Yeah. It doesn't have to be the best thing ever, but just do it. Give it a go. Be open to it.
And that's so different to what, let's say, your mindset was before you had your breakdown, because it perhaps was I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to go out, I'm going to do 10K. And if I don't do 5-minute miles, it's going to be a bad day.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly it.
There's a lot of people, and I've got friends who kind of share their runs. And
I hate that so
it's
much.
I did this. It's like for me, it's just like, I just got outside. I got my trainers on and I went for a jog. But you know what? 5 minutes into it, I ththought, screw this. I hate this. I'm going to walk for a little bit. But I'd already achieved what I wanted to. I felt good because I was outside.
Yeah, that's it. And I actually, you look at these people who post these things and you think, you're looking for that affirmation from someone, aren't you? You're looking for that validation, and it's quite, But I think exercise is really, really, really powerful, I would say, at chemically changing your brain, making you feel that I don't exercise at all for my own physical looks or nothing it's really just about how I feel. And when I don't exercise, I do not feel as good as if I had done it. So and the other thing is, we have this idea in our heads sometimes of it being just for like elite people who look good in spandex or whatever it's called, lycra or whatever. It's not. Exercise is for everyone. It's a natural thing. It's part of moving your body is what your body is for. It doesn't need to look glamorous.
Right.
You don't need to do it with anybody else. It doesn't need to be a competition. Just move, just enjoy it and do something that you enjoy. It doesn't need to be running. That was just what I chose to do. But if you want to jump on a trampoline, do that. Do a variety of things if you get bored of one thing as well. So
and things like you said, going for a walk, gardening, whatever it is, just move. Like, we are, as human beings, we are built to move. I mean, to be honest, we're not built to sit at a desk all day.
No,
we know that's what we're not to do. So if you are sat at a desk all day for 15 hours and you're not having breaks, well, it doesn't, I don't need to be a psychotherapist or psychiatrist to think that you might struggle a little bit. Go on those breaks, take that exercise. Don't judge yourself on what you're doing. I know that's very easy to say, but just if work is hard, just get out there, do some walking, do some running. And I trust me, and I hopefully trust you, Ellie, you will feel better.
You will feel better. You will. You might not feel, I don't know. This is the other thing, right? Before, I was like, I need to know that things are going to be better. Someone needs to tell me that this will never happen again. Now I'm at this stage where I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. Like, I'm starting a new job in 2 weeks' time. I might hate the job. I don't know that. Hopefully I won't. Hopefully I've got the skills to enable me to feel empowered and to go on and do it, whatever. But also now I'm at a stage where, I suppose failure is a thing that most people are afraid of. Failure and rejection, right? And what is failure essentially? It's just something that you've created. You decide whether something's a failure or not, don't you? Is it a failure if you do a job and then acknowledge, actually, this isn't for me? Not really. I suppose you've learned something from that. You could argue it's a success because now you have eliminated something, haven't you? And so, I think, again, that's another thing in our society is we have this idea of failure and of failure being something that's really shameful and negative and something that you should avoid, rather than being something that actually is really informative and useful and can help you to be happy in the long term.
It's part of the process. Right? It really is. Like, and again, how you articulate it as well is amazing. Like, Ellie, I'm just looking at the time. We're gonna have to wrap up, but I just want to say thank you so much for just your openness and honesty about an extremely difficult situation, and that hopefully our listeners can hope, in some respects, if people are going through very similar things, we really hope that you're okay. But also,
but if you're not okay, that's okay.
That's
it's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely. And take it from Ellie's journey as well, that there's that really kind of, I really like how you say that there's a very subtle mindset shift. Rather than thinking almost from the future looking back, you're now looking from the present looking out, and accepting that the future is uncertain. It's, and that's a very powerful mindset shift. So I can only thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights as a consequence of that journey, and really pleased that you're making such great progress today.
Oh, thank you very much. And if anyone is listening and thinking that they couldn't do what I've done, I haven't, to be honest. What you need to understand is that you don't have to do what I've done. You just need to do what's good for you, and take every day as it comes, and put no pressure on yourself whatsoever, but just let yourself, honestly, I think the mind is self-actualizing. So, give yourself the right conditions and you'll be all right. There you go.
Ellie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show. And in the content of what we've been talking about, that kind of that holistic mental health and well-being, please do check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad. It's a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. But as Ellie, I'm sure, will attest to, don't be on your phone the whole time. There is a whole world of nature out there. And the app does say, stop doing exercises, mental health exercises, go outside for a walk. So it enables you to build a personalized wellbeing toolkit to help you deal with your life's ups and downs. Just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Ellie, thank you so much again.
Thank you.